Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning in the States. Thank you for joining us in the middle of the holiday season and such a largely unprecedented heat wave in Europe. Our today paper launch webinar is dedicated to the question of how to enhance women's political participation in the former Eastern neighborhood, now officially candidate or potential candidate countries of Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia. My name is Hegedüs. I work as fellow for Central Europe at the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and I'm warmly welcoming our today's three speakers: GMF ReThink.CEE fellow Darina Dvornichenko, the author of the today presented paper; Magda Jakubowska, Vice President and Director of Operations at Publica Foundation in Warsaw and founding mother of Women Are NATO; and
good afternoon.
And last but not least, Victoria Roșa, security and foreign policy expert and former security and defense advisor of the Moldovan Prime Minister, Maia Sandu. All three countries of the association trio have been following an ambitious reform agenda in pursuit of the accession perspective to the European Union, and their democratic politics experienced profound changes over the past 15 years. However, there is one key indicator of genuine political reform and good governance where progress of the three countries has been varied and in some cases remained limited. And this is women's political representation. Darina's paper investigates the key factors and challenges that inhibit women's political engagement in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, and formulates important recommendations. How could the efficiency of existing policy tools be improved, or which new policy instruments could help to foster women's representation in politics? Regarding the run of the show, Darina will present her paper's main findings in approximately 20 minutes, followed by Magda's and Victoria's comments in 10-15 minutes each. And approximately after 45 minutes, we will go into the Q&A. And please use, ladies and gentlemen, either the Q&A or chat function of Zoom to submit your questions to our panelists. I also would like to remind you that the event is recorded and will be available online at the YouTube channel of the German Marshall Fund. And last but not least, I would like to mention that Darina's paper is part of GMF's ReThink.CEE fellowship program, which support innovative projects conducted by the next generation of policy analysts and civic activists from the Central and Eastern European region and the Western Balkan. And having said that, over to you, Darina. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Daniel, for your kind introduction. I will start by sharing my screen with you.
It was working.
Could you see it? Yes.
Yep.
I cannot actually. Let me try again. Yeah, now you can probably see it.
Yes,
right?
It's working.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you, sorry for these couple of seconds. So the research I would love to present for you today is mainly focusing on the roots of women's underrepresentation in three targeted countries: Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. In my research, I was trying to investigate the questions why actually Moldova is currently demonstrating the biggest progress in terms of gender equality in women's at the national level. The paper examines also the use of gender quotas, the role of other instruments which mainstream gender equality at the national and local levels. Last but not least, it focuses on the barriers which women face when they start political career or when they are elected. The starting point for this research is, first of all, the obvious similarities between Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. That's first of all the common history, common totalitarian legacy, common goal to join the European Union, and common enemy, Russia. All three countries currently are experiencing the same or similar level of pressure from international organizations and donors in their pursuit of reforms. And here is actually where we can observe the main discrepancy among all three countries, as Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova are actually moving to their common goal in a different pace and with in a different way. And it leads to pretty divergent results in different fields where the reforms are being implemented currently, including the field of gender equality. As you can see, for example, in the next slide, Moldova is doing much better in terms of gender equality when we are talking about the national level. It also seems that Ukraine is demonstrating progress in terms of gender equality at the local level in comparison with Moldova and Georgia. However, if we compare the results of the latest elections, the local level in Ukraine with the previous elections, local elections in Ukraine, we will see that actually the number of women elected at the local level decreased significantly by over 12%. And the reason for it is partially the reform of decentralization and its side effect as amalgamated communities appeared or emerged as the result of the reform of decentralization led to the fact that the communities received much more financial resources and much more competencies in spending these resources. So the such levels of such administrative levels as the level of villages, village councils or settlement councils have become much more attractive for men and the competition for seats in the village councils and settlement councils has increased significantly since the reform of decentralization was implemented in Ukraine. The research actually, in my research, I was trying to answer the question why Moldova is showing so high number of women elected at the level of parliament. And Ukraine still, even in comparison with the previous local elections, if the number of women is lower, but still Ukraine is showing pretty high number of women elected at the local level. And the answer to these questions, the question why, I was trying to find in the overview of legislation, mainly how the gender quotas of the national and local levels were used, how they were introduced in the legislation, and if there are any other instruments that mainstream gender equality at the national and local level. It should be noted that all three countries had undergone and had made a lot of efforts before finally the mandatory gender quotas were introduced in the legislation. And it's not only the gender quota on the national level and on the local level, which affected significantly the number of women elected, which led to quantitative results. But it's also the placing of women, or the rule where women should be placed on the electoral list, which also played a huge role. Right now, all three countries have the relevant rules in their legislation, which provides for specific placement of women in the electoral list. For instance, like in Moldova, 4 candidates in each 10 positions that should be given to another gender. In Georgia, every 4th or at the national level, or every 3rd at the local level that should be given to another gender, or 2 to 3 in each 5 positions ratio in Ukraine. However, apart from the gender quotas, which definitely played a huge role in boosting the number of women at the local and national level, all three countries also made a lot of progress in establishing formal institutions which mainstreamed gender equality, such as gender equality councils at the national local level in Georgia, or the positions in the government of the relevant advisors to the Prime Minister on human rights and gender equality. And despite all this progress, we can still observe that the political environment in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine is still male-dominated. And there are still barriers women face when they enter the political environment and when they start their political career. To investigate these barriers, I have conducted semi-structured qualitative interviews with women politicians in all three countries. Some of the interviews were also conducted with the active promoters of gender equality in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. And as a result of these interviews, it has become possible to compile the list of the main factors that still hamper women's representation, both at the local and national levels. And the first factor, which was mentioned by most interviewers in the majority of interviews, is the lack of transparency in the recruitment process inside political parties. There is still a high level of nepotism and corruption in all three countries when the electoral list is compiled. And that's the barrier not only for women to be included, that's also the barrier for everyone. Also men, young men who are ambitious and who might create competition for the party leaders. Another factor that hampers women's representation, which
I hope that Darina will return in a second. Please bear with us, ladies and gentlemen. We have a backup connectivity plan for Darina, who is connecting to us from outside of the European Union. And I'm sure that she will be back in a couple of seconds. Meanwhile, I think potentially until she joins, I would like to ask you, Victoria or Magda, whether you have potentially any actual comments either to the state of play or to the gender quotas, so the topics which were touched upon by the presentation of Darina until now.
Yes, of course, if you will allow me.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, first of all, I would like to congratulate Darina for the great paper and also for having the courage to research such an important topic and a very difficult one, I would say, taking into account that she has made a comparison between three countries which aspire to become members of the European Union. And yes, Darina is back, so I think we can give the floor to her back.
Yes, thank you so much. And then we will come back to you later, Victoria. Thank you so much. Darina, you are online again. Please continue.
terrible. Sorry, the idea to play safe and connect to hotspot actually was not the best one. Actually, it was probably the hotspot now. Terrible, sorry for these interruptions. So I can go back to the presentation where we stopped. Actually, it was about the financial resources. Yeah, and the brightest example of the burden which women face in the elections regarding the financial resources is the increase of deposit, which candidates have to pay in order to take part in the elections. According to the latest amendment, according to the newly adopted electoral code in Ukraine, for example, the deposit for a candidate who would like to run for the elections for the mayoral position has increased in 10 times. And it's not only about deposit, which candidates have to pay as part of the elections. It's also about the expenses which candidates bear when they campaign. For instance, again, we can rely on the example from Ukraine. As a result of the reform of decentralization, the communities have become larger, consolidated. That means that it requires much more efforts from candidates to be elected on the local level, as in the past, they used to be visible on the level of one village, but now they have to invest much more efforts and much more resources in order to become visible on the level of the whole amalgamated community. Unethical practices among parties in order to comply with gender quotas was also mentioned by most respondents as one of the main impediments for women when they enter political environment. I managed to have the interview with several women who were included in the electoral list as technical candidates. There was then an arrangement between them and the political party that as soon as they are elected, and if they're elected, they will have to step down from their mandate. That's a common practice which we now face not only in Ukraine, and one of my interviewers actually refused to step down from her mandate after the election, so broke the arrangement with the political party and faced the biggest in her life psychological pressure, I would say psychological terror and violence from other members of the political party. Not all women are ready for such pressure and for such terror. So the gender quotas and how they are used is still a controversial question. In order to mitigate this challenge, here probably the experience of Georgia might be of use, where the law precisely provides for the replacement of women who step down from her position as an elected member of council to be replaced by the same gender candidate. The lack of human and financial resources of formal institutions, which mainstream gender equality, is another challenge for women. Most of the institutions which have been established in all three targeted countries are pretty weak and ineffective due to the fact that they simply don't have enough human and financial resources. Some interviews, for example, reflect to the meetings which are usually held behind the closed doors with the only aim to tick the box and provide nice reports to the international donors and organizations. However, it is not about the results. It's not about the performance, which will ultimately make the difference for gender equality in the targeted country. For instance, in Georgia, the part of gender local councils, which are financed from the budget, can have just 800 euros per year allocated for its performance, which we understand is nothing in order to implement any changes. Sexism in speeches of other politicians, also in media and in other institutions, deeply rooted stereotypes, gender disinformation is another challenge. And here most interviews also mentioned that since the emergence of social media, they have become victims of attacks much more frequently. To mitigate this challenge, one of the solutions might be the establishment or the creation of the relevant instruments, relevant platforms that will give the woman who has been attacked the opportunity to submit a complaint with an option to be anonymous, to remain anonymous, and the burden of proof should be definitely shifted to the man, and the relevant disciplinary measures should be taken against the alleged perpetrator. But unfortunately, the examples of such platforms are pretty rare. One of the examples is the platform which was created in Moldova. Ukraine and Georgia cannot boast any examples so far. Lack of success stories and role models among successful women politicians was also named among most interviews. And here, I do not want to underestimate the great role of Moldova and Georgia presidents and Moldova prime minister, and also other women such as Darina, for example, who is the head of the women's wing in the Party of Action and Solidarity in Moldova. These examples, these women are definitely role models, but on the national level, and they do not make up the critical mass. Moreover, their experience does not explain precisely to women who like to join the politics and to enter absolutely new for them environment at the local level. What steps should be done? Where to start? It's still unclear for women who would love to start their political career at the local level. So more success stories are really needed at the local level, at the level of not only cities, but also villages. And last but not least is the low engagement of men as agents of change in the field of gender equality and women's representation in politics. This is still a question, gender equality is still a question of which is raised by women and for women. It's still a pretty marginalized question, and men tend not to involve, not to engage in any discussion or in raising this question without saying in promoting gender equality. The brightest example for it can be provided in Georgia, where the newly appointed advisor to the Prime Minister on Human Rights and Gender Equality decided to change the title of his position and exclude the second collocation, Gender Equality, from the official title. However, the profile of his position still covers gender equality, but it says a lot that men still feel embarrassed to be associated with promotion of gender equality. And here is, I would say that that's the crucial issue, as the gender equality, where the voice of everyone, not only women, but everyone is heard, can be achieved only when both men and women have the same goal and move in the same direction. Here I would probably stop and give the floor to Daniel and Magda and Victoria, and I would love to thank you for your attention, and I would be glad to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darina, for this great presentation and the thought-provoking findings. I'm sure that we will also come back later to your recommendations, how all of these challenges could be also mitigated. But at that point, I would like to turn to Victoria. Serving as Maia Sandu's Security and Foreign Policy Advisor, I think you have had the opportunity to really gather first-hand experiences with women's representation in Moldova, in the Moldovan politics. How do Darina's findings resonate with your experiences? Over to you, Victoria.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniel. As I mentioned before, I would like to congratulate Darina. First of all, I am not really sure if she heard about it, but definitely it's a very good paper and a great work done in order to compare the three countries which are now wishing to become members of the European Union. And why I mentioned this specifically, because actually Moldova started to think in terms of policies, but in terms of changing stereotypes about non-discrimination on gender criteria already in 2012. When we had the action plan on visa liberalization. And actually this action plan included one very important chapter, the chapter on human rights, and non-discrimination policies were actually one of the conditionalities which were imposed by the European Union in order for Moldova to enhance its cooperation with the European Union. So I would say, first of all, that actually the non-discrimination agenda in Moldova and the gender criteria started to become a topic of relevance and importance, actually also due to the donor community and due to the Europeanization agenda of the Republic of Moldova. And also in 2012, a non-discrimination council emerged, but also the first policies on non-discrimination were adopted. And then actually in Moldova publicly, we started to talk about gender equality. This was an agenda which was pushed a lot by the donor community, and this was actually one of the conditionalities imposed by practically every donor now when it comes to implementation of different technical assistance projects in the Republic of Moldova. Why I'm mentioning this? Because here it's a very important thing, and Darina has touched upon this issue. The fact that we do have legislation, but it's important to implement this legislation and also to have secondary legislation for the full implementation of the legal framework. And you also have to have a budget for it, and it should not be a budget which is given by donors through different kind of projects, but it should be a budget which is given by the state, by the government, because in this way they start to have accountability, but also impose the sustainability of the process. And this is another key word, sustainability, because we really need these policies to function even when donors will not impose it as a conditionality. So definitely, I think that, of course, it is very important that gender mainstreaming is also valid and functioning outside, the donor community conditionalities, and it should become already a norm in the society, but also in the practices of the institutions as such. Also, another point which I would like to touch upon, and the question I would like to answer, Darina has mentioned it several times during her presentation, why Moldova is succeeding in promoting the gender mainstreaming and the women empowerment. And I would say from my own experience that actually the role models do have a very important job here, because I became a security and defense advisor to the Prime Minister only due to the fact that the then Prime Minister and the current President of the Republic of Moldova, Maia Sandu, trusted me. This is an area for men, a field male dominated, and it was very hard for me to imagine that I would ever take such a job if she would have not trusted me. And actually, it's not only about me, it's also about a lot of women that you see now having different high-level position in the administration, in the government, in the parliament, because actually she was the one who was actively promoting women engagement in politics, but also in public affairs. And here I think that I would a bit disagree with the fact that it did not really have an impact also on the local level, because indeed it had. If we look at the representation in the Moldovan parliament, we can see that a lot of women who are represented in the parliament and who are parliamentarians, they are actually local leaders. And this was also one new practice that the PAS party has introduced in making the voice of the people in the region heard, by taking local leaders and of course promoting them in this kind of position as parliamentarians as they are at the moment. And I think that this is one important issue that we have to actually take into account, that we really need to rely on each other and to promote each other, because it's not only about having a good experience and professional expertise, but you also need to identify people, to trust in them and to promote them. This is the key to success, actually. If we go to another point, which I would like to touch upon, it's also related to the different challenges that women are facing, because Darina was talking about different elements which hamper actually the women's representation, but also the engagement of women in different activities. And she has pointed out very good several elements which hamper women's representation. But one thing that I would like to still bring to the discussion would be the safetiness. Because even now this is even more relevant, and I was conducting studies in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova, which you all know that it is a breakaway region. And one important element which I identify was the fact that women did not engaged in politics, but also in activities of social importance in their communities, because they were afraid. They were afraid that they will not be able to solve different kind of challenges of political sort of challenges, that they will not be able to speak out, and they will not be able to face the male dominance. And I think that this is something that we will see even more now due to the conflict in Ukraine. That female will women will fear their safetiness of their families, and they will not be so much engaged as they would like to be, due to this fear for the safetiness of their families, but also of the fact that they are not sufficiently prepared to face different kind of situations that might emerge. And I think that here is something that we have to actually think how we can, at the legal level, but also at the practical level, how we can help these women out, and how we can encourage them to speak out. Because actually, when we're talking about conflict, we all know that women are the category of the population which is mostly affected by conflict. And the last point that I would like to speak, because I have 4 minutes more to go, it's actually about how we can encourage women to be more active, and it is actually by own model. So I think that each woman who succeeded in their career, they have the responsibility to encourage and to send these messages to other women and to support them, to mentor them, in order to have the word spread, and to be able to create a community of women of their own, of successful women. And of course, in this way, I think that it's also a way that we can combat stereotypes. And Darina has mentioned it very well in her paper, that all the societies in all the 3 countries are actually affected very much by the stereotypes, which still come from the Soviet Union. And thank you very much, Darina, for also making this transition from the Soviet past to the present. I think that this is very relevant for the paper, but definitely in Moldova we still face a lot of stereotypes, and unfortunately these stereotypes are not only male ones, but also ones that females are promoting themselves. So here I think that we should work both with women but also with male in order to combat the stereotypes, and also to combat the disinformation, the gendered disinformation, because actually when we are talking about gender equality, I think that in our societies this concept is not correctly understood by the population. And at least for the case of Moldova, this was a very big issue. If I go back to 2012, as I mentioned, when we were talking about non-discrimination on different criteria, actually when you start talking about non-discrimination, everybody's thinking that you are talking about sexual minorities rights, and this is an issue that we have to combat. We have to make people understand that there are different types of discrimination criteria, and that these are values which are not some values which are invented now, or values which which correspond to the societies and communities in the European Union countries or Western countries, but these are values which also are related to us. These are values that our ancestors have had, and this is important, to create a value system, to include gender in our value system, and to create linkages which people would understand. And I think that this actually is the key to success, to find those triggers that would make the linkage between the values that people are sharing in their communities and also the criteria of non-discrimination as gender is. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for all of these excellent points. And Magda, being one of the potentially most active advocates of women's engagement in international politics from the CEE region, what were your primal impressions and thoughts by reading Darina's analysis and findings? Over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. First of all, I also want to congratulate Darina on the paper. It's always very important to have another good analysis on women and their underrepresentation in many aspects, because we don't, here we talk about politics, but to be honest, this is just one of the fields. Always this approach that Darina has taken is very much focused on how it looks like, which is very important comparison in all the three countries, sharing the same legacy, but also sharing, I hope, a common future in the EU. I somehow wanted to compare the politics issue to security, which I'm more into. As you, Daniel, mentioned a few years ago, I have conducted this project for women empowerment in security area called Women Are NATO, as kind of opposition or continuation rather to We Are NATO campaign. And what I have noticed in there is of course the question of how much the role of women is defined in such areas that are a little blur, because security, of course, to some extent, is about war, is about military, where we can't see a clear role for women, although there is, of course, there should be a clear picture there. This is the same with politics, where obviously the stereotypic thinking, very often fueled by this gender disinformation, and also conservative narratives, makes it more difficult for women to find their space in this area. So I wanted to focus a little more on this female understanding or misunderstanding of the role, which very when undefined in a larger spectrum, does not allow women to feel comfortable to get the role. In our Central and Eastern European countries, because this is not only about Moldova or Ukraine or Georgia aspiring to the EU, but also we can say that all the post-communist countries share the same kind of pattern in that respect. Admittedly, this very much comes from this stereotypic understanding of women's role in the society and in the household. So as much as we can seek solutions in quotas, in more legislative solutions to the system, I would say that very much the question of education and kind of inclusiveness in terms of language, of more role models, or of more women being in representing, or I would say more women being present in media, for example, in this social bubbles where you can really hear their voice, give them authority to talk, to bring their own perspective, is quite an important factor here. So this question of education, I would put as a key to all the elements, and also like the key to progress. Of course, it's a long-term solutions, but anyways, we should see that the underdevelopment is stemming from both the culture and the understanding of female role, but also the not enough education for women. As I I promised I will focus more on Georgia. Here, the situation is very difficult in that term. Of course, women are well educated, and in Tbilisi, this is not such an issue. But honestly, in the other parts of Georgia that are a little less developed in that sense, women who gain medium level education prevail. They don't have this good access to education, to higher education, and also that doesn't bring them too much in sense of their future career and possibilities that education can open to them. The marriage rate, and especially underage marriage age in Georgia, is very low, meaning the women get married very early. This is very often of economic reasons, but this also means that they are dependent economically, and therefore this funding question that Darina has been very often touching upon is just not the case here. Next, the unemployment, which is also the question of economic organization. Women, on one hand, have because of the under-education or not enough education, have lower access to high posts, but also this traditions and their traditional role that they should stay at home gives them lesser access to work and to becoming independent. Additionally, I wanted to mention this the question of pay gap, which is always very high in the countries of Eastern Partnership. In countries here that we are discussing, this is in all almost around 40%, which is quite a significant difference in payments, in wages, sorry. I would argue that this is also a huge issue. Many of also this stereotypic and traditional, many of the employers and employees having this stereotypical thinking do not want women in higher posts. This is claimed that they feel bad under the supervisory of women, so they are not given those posts in many cases. So therefore, I would argue to have the education and the question of better education and more accessible education as the key to the progress in terms of any female empowerment in those countries. Coming back to role models, because that was very much my finding in the Women Are NATO project. Role models are very important there. Admittedly, Maya Sandu or Salome Zarubashvili, the president of Georgia, are kind of, or are absolutely something new, because these are the first women presidents in those countries, and definitely they give kind of empowerment to other women to go that way, to feel more comfortable in having higher either political or or even business roles in the country. So this was also my finding in terms of security. I mean, military, or so I would say that this is having role models, campaigns on how they gain their roles and what they say about it as an important factor. And I think this is mostly this for the moment. I'm waiting for the questions.
Thank you so much, Magda, for the great comments, and especially for underlining the role of certain hard social variables which are hampering women's empowerment in these countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to encourage you to submit your questions or comments. But before we would open the Q&A, I would like to give the floor back to Darina to respond to the comments, and potentially also very briefly to summarize some of the policy recommendations which were made in the paper. How could women's political participation be enhanced, at least in some way, in these three countries? Over to you, Darina.
Thank you, Daniel. First of all, I would love to thank Magda and Victoria for great comments and for your great contribution. Your insight is really much appreciated, and your experience is really great use. And I'm sure that actually the topic is, doesn't have any borders for research, doesn't have any borders for exploration. And unfortunately, this issue is going to be on the agenda for a long time in the future. We still have a lot to do. That is why in my paper, I was trying to formulate some kind of recommendations for both external and internal actors, domestic actors, and external actors such as international organizations that will be guiding those stakeholders in their efforts to make the difference in the gender equality in all three targeted countries. The main recommendation that I would love to raise now for domestic actors is, first of all, the necessity and the need to work directly with let me start with the external actors, with international organizations, which work a lot in the area of capacity building and raising awareness on gender equality, working together with women as a group. And here I would actually believe that the more effective way would be to support women as individuals, not as members of specific groups, not as members of political parties or as candidates, but women individuals. Individual level support would bring much more result. The example of such individual level support could be given from the previous experience. For instance, in Ukraine, there were several projects which provided for funding of assistance to novice women elected as members of parliament. These projects didn't have any systematic character. So these efforts were pretty random, but we do understand that women who were just elected as members of parliament do need assistance. And probably these kind of support, individual level support on hiring personal assistance or on political campaign for women would be much more helpful in these context. Also, the necessity to work directly with political parties is crucial. One of the recommendations, and which was given in the paper, is to ensure the exchange of experience between those political parties which managed to reach some positive results inside their political party, and those which are still lacking the relevant expertise how to do it. It shouldn't be just the know-how which belongs to specific political parties which are leaders in promoting gender equality. There should be an exchange of experience and lessons learned also, not only positive experience, but also lessons learned should be also ensured. Last but not least, the civil society, then local non-governmental organizations which are working at the grassroots level should be also engaged by international organizations, by donors, in, for instance, monitoring political parties' performance in gender audit, in checking the effectiveness of the relevant institutions established in all 3 countries. It shouldn't be just, it should be, first of all, specific indicators developed together with the civil society organizations and external actors, and it should be greater involvement of civil society organizations in such activity. As for the domestic actors, I would briefly, probably because of the lack of time, I would briefly touch some recommendations which are related to political parties. The example of, I would say that here, most of these recommendations were inspired by the performance of the Party of Action and Solidarity in Moldova, where we can see the really motivating environment for women. First of all, the need to introduce internal parties quotas, so the gender quotas which are on the level of the political party, inside the political party, and which is a kind of filter and also which promote the transparency in compiling the electoral list, might be a solution here. The creation of women's wings inside political parties and women's platforms in the parliament, as for instance, the discussion that is ongoing right now in Moldova, and Ukraine can also boast in this field as there is a platform, equal opportunities created in Ukraine. So that is a kind of positive example, and these examples should be maintained and accelerated, and should be also assimilated by Georgia. And last but not least is also the political parties themselves should also be interested in conducting gender audits, in monitoring their activity, and in better transparency. Again, it's not only about women, it's not only about women's benefit to achieve gender equality, it's for the benefit of everyone to achieve gender balanced environment. Here I would love to stop, and first of all, before we start questions and answers session, I would be happy first of all to thank German Marshall Fund for the opportunity to conduct the research. And I think that that was a great support from all, from the German Marshall Fund, and I could really feel this support. And I highly encourage other young women and men, leaders, activists, to pursue their ambitions and their goals, and can apply for the fellowships within German Marshall Fund and make their dreams come true. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darina, for your kind words and the recommendation. I think we definitely don't need better PR. So thank you once again. And ladies and gentlemen, the Q&A is open. Please submit your questions and comments via the Q&A or the chat function. And we already have one question from Catherine Baker, who is asking Darina whether you have been able to identify in-country, regional, or territorial differences of women's representation during your research. And if yes, what may be in the background of such in-country differences, and what different factors could potentially explain them. And if you allow me, I also would like to potentially ask a further question. I found your point particularly intriguing when you argued in your presentation that the deposit-based candidacy system in Ukraine is practically gender biased and discourages female candidacy during the election process. And I would like to have a twofold question. The first one, whether a different non-deposit based, but potentially recommendation signature based candidacy system could provide a more gender balanced candidacy or election results in your eyes. And second, what are the experiences with election candidacy system in the other two countries? Whether you have seen potentially similar bias processes or disturbances. To be honest, I don't know how particularly these candidacy systems are working in Georgia or Moldova, but I would be very, very grateful for your insights or potential for Victoria's insights regarding Moldova. Over to you, Darina.
Thank you. I would start with the first question regarding in-country differences. And I would here rely on the example of Ukraine, where we definitely can observe the differences in the, first of all, in the terms of gender equality. And these differences are explained by the very fact of the conflict by the war started since in 2014. And I would say that the 2014 triggered the changes in the electorate inside Ukraine. The part of the population residing in the eastern part of Ukraine have ultimately become IDPs, internally displaced persons, moving to other parts of to other regions of Ukraine, and their inclusion, their further engagement in the new communities where they had to start their new life was not so easy, and is not so easy even now. We understand that, for instance, we are talking mainly about women who had to move from Donetsk, for instance, in 2014, 2015, and later, who were pretty active in their communities in Donetsk region or in Lugansk region, was occupied by a part of which was occupied by Russia in 2014. But the integration in the new communities was not so smooth and did not allow these women to be active on the local level as they used to be in Donetsk, for instance, before Russia's invasion there in 2014. So these differences in electorate and the differences and these in-country differences will be much more amplified and will be even stronger as a result of the present war in Ukraine. And we can now only speculate how much the electorate of Ukraine will change in a couple of years, especially now when according to the UN data, several millions women left Ukraine and are now outside Ukraine. Some of them, we might speculate, might never return, and it might trigger the male dominance in some areas when the new elections will, when the time for the next elections will approach. I think that that's all what I can say about the first question. Daniel, turning to your question, it was about the constituency, right? Whether the constituency majoritarian system. Sorry.
Yeah, about the candidacy in the individual constituencies. You mentioned that it's the candidacy process is based on the payment of a certain deposit, and it has an unbalanced effect on women's representation. And my question was whether another form of candidacy system, which is not based on deposit payment, but the collection of signatures, for example, could provide a more gender balanced policy outcome.
So far, turning to Ukraine's example, the requirement to pay the deposit is in force regarding all settlements, cities, villages, which have the population over 90,000. So if the population is less than 90,000, then there is no deposit. But however, when we are talking about towns and city level, this requirement is a challenge for everyone who would love to, have the aim to run for the elections. On the other hand, there is a good example from Moldova, which during the last elections turned to the proportional system, and before the last elections actually canceled the proportional system and again returned to the mixed system. And if we compare the results of the latest elections in Moldova and the previous parliamentary elections, we come up with the conclusion that proportional system is actually much more effective and it brings better results. And that's also the aim for Georgia, to move to the proportional system in the next elections. And the next elections in Ukraine, according to the newly adopted electoral code, will be also conducted in accordance with the full proportional system, where the political parties compile the list of candidates. And there is no way for specific candidate to be appointed as a candidate and to be included in the elections. The problem which we can see right now in Ukraine, and the novelty which appeared in the electoral code regarding the increase of deposit, was actually justified by the fact that in the past there were a lot of technical candidates who were running for mayoral positions and who dispersed the attention of voters in the election campaign and during the elections themselves. So in order to stop this trend, and in order not to allow some political forces to have particular technical cosmetic candidates for mayoral positions, for example, the deposit was increased. The side effect of this trend, the side effect of these of the increase of deposit, definitely not everyone can afford it. But I would also give the floor to Victoria, who could also comment on, right, and Magda, who can also comment on this issue.
Thank you so much, Darina. Ladies and gentlemen, I still would like to encourage you that we have a couple of minutes to consider potentially further questions to our speakers. And yes, I would like to turn to you, Victoria and Magda, whether you would like to comment either on the in-country differences question or to the candidacy system or procedure in the respective countries. I don't know who would like to start. Victoria, please.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think that Darina has explained it very well, the case of Moldova, but I think that one thing that I would like to add is the fact that unfortunately in Moldova, we still face at the local level the fear of women to candidate because they are intimidated. And so the intimidation is a factor which is still ongoing in Moldova, and we clearly hear these messages when we go in the regions. So female women in this case are discouraged to participate and to candidate. Especially I have heard this kind of arguments in the Caucasian region, even though you know the Bashkan of Caucasia is a lady. And here I would like to mention the importance of the role model and how you can perceive, because having a female leader does not necessarily mean that she will become a role model, you know, and she will actually contribute to gender mainstreaming. And this is why I think that the role of Maia Sandu, but also of Doina German, of the Prime Minister of Moldova, of Natalia Gavrița is very important, because they actually created this wave, you know, of spreading, but also talking about gender equality. And this is not less important. You have to talk about it and not only, you know, serve as a role model yourself. So definitely, I think that encouraging females at the local level to participate is also an important thing, not only the institutional, you know, requirements being in place. This is not sufficient enough. You really need to talk to women and to create a safe environment for them to participate and to candidate. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Magda?
This is what I wanted to say, that the safe environment would bring more women to the table. I mean, in Georgia, this is very much visible, that the stereotypic understanding of female role at home, being at home, and not allowing her to have the position that is superior to men, especially the position of power in politics, especially in the local communities, is very visible in the numbers, because obviously this level of not even 30% is just not enough. In Poland, on the other hand, we have very strong local women representation, political representation. Women are very active. They get support. They are even the ladies who are heading villages and small, very small communities, have their own caucuses, and you know, this is kind of a snowball effect nowadays. So I think that from the very beginning, and this is, I would see the opportunity for Ukraine now being in a huge crisis, but women had to take over some of the typically men's roles. And be the breadwinners and you know, arrange for everything nowadays when men are gone, to have similar effect and similar you know, empowerment and be local leaders nowadays.
Thank you so much, Magda. I hope that you will be right, and potentially as tragic the current events are, potentially they can also serve as a positive catalyst for women's representation in Ukrainian politics. As we are approaching the end of our webinar, I would like to say a big thank you for all of our great panelists for the food for thought, for Darina for the excellent presentation and paper, for Magda and Victoria for the great comments. And also, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us today. Have a nice summer break, and hopefully see you next time by our next GMF ReThink.CEE paper launch webinar, potentially in September. Thank you, and have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All the best.